The room smelled like burned coffee and stress. Specialist Danny Odom had been standing against the back wall of the Fort Caldwin Criminal Investigations Task Force suite for 40 minutes, holding a stack of printed grid maps nobody had asked for, trying to look like he belonged there. He was 23 years old. He did not belong there. At the front of the room, Lieutenant Marcus Graves was briefing a case that had the whole base holding its breath. A 7-year-old girl named Iris had been missing since dawn, 8 hours now, last seen on the walking path behind base housing, near the tree line. One MP at the door, one sergeant at the board, 3 investigators in folding chairs, and Graves at the front in pressed blues, pointing at a topographic overlay like he was the only one who understood geography. Danny noticed the woman in the corner before Graves turned to address her. She was sitting in a gray camp chair against the side wall, not at the table, the kind of placement that said she hadn't been invited to pull up to it. Mid-30s, dark-haired, wearing a plain Army PT jacket over her uniform top. A staff sergeant's collar, but the name tape said Delwyn, not a name Danny recognized from the investigation unit. She had a yellow legal pad on one knee and a topographic printout on the other, and she was marking something in pencil, quiet, steady, not looking at the board. She hadn't said a word in 40 minutes. Graves noticed her at the same time Danny did, which is to say he'd been aware of her the whole time and had been building to this. Sergeant Delwyn. He didn't look up from his pointer. I appreciate you stopping by. Your input on the housing section filings was noted. We're good. She looked up. I'd like to stay on the search. This investigation is being handled by the task force. He set the pointer on the table. Your clearances are administrative. The case profile exceeds them. I've worked missing person recoveries in forward environments, she said. Her voice was level, the kind of level that wasn't trying to be. The wood line behind Block 7 fits a specific behavioral pattern. I'd like to cover it. The sector has been assigned. Graves folded his hands. You're dismissed, Sergeant. He said it in front of every person in the room. The 3 investigators looked at their folders. The sergeant at the board found something urgent on the map. Danny stared at the stack of grid printouts in his hands. She stood, picked up her legal pad, folded her topographic sheet in quarters, and slid it into her jacket pocket. She didn't argue. She didn't look at the room to see who was watching. She walked to the door, nodded once at nobody in particular, and left. Danny went back to not knowing where to put his hands. The search continued through the afternoon, the assigned sector, the housing perimeter, the road approaches. 2 teams of MPs, a dog unit from the Kennel Battalion, a county sheriff's deputy who'd driven out as a courtesy. By 4 in the afternoon they had 11 people on the grid and a child who still wasn't anywhere on it. Graves kept the briefing tight. He was not a cruel man. He was a man who believed in procedure the way some men believe in weather, as something that simply governed the world, and procedure said the case belonged to the task force, not to an administrative NCO from the personnel building who showed up uninvited. He was not wrong about procedure. He was only wrong about her. At 5:17, SFC Mara Delwyn walked out of the wood line behind Block 7 housing holding a 7-year-old girl named Iris. Danny Odom heard about it from the desk sergeant before he saw it, a radio call, 2 words and a sector marker, the girl's name, and the grid, not one of the assigned sectors, a pocket of dense undergrowth between the fence line and the dry creek bed that the teams had bypassed. He was across the parking lot before the vehicles had moved. She had the girl on her hip. Iris had both arms around Mara's neck and her face pressed into the jacket collar, not crying, just holding on the way children hold on when they've made it to the other side of being terrified. Mara's boots were muddy to the ankle. There was a scratch along her left forearm. She was talking quietly to the girl as she walked, something about a water bottle and whether she liked apple juice better than grape, an ordinary question asked in an ordinary voice, the kind of voice that says nothing is wrong anymore, nothing was ever going to stay wrong. She walked Iris straight to the medics. She did not walk to Graves. She did not wait for a camera. She handed the child to the paramedic, gave a clear 2-sentence handoff, 7-year-old female, no visible injuries, mild dehydration, was down in the dry creek bed under the root overhang, eastern fence line, grid Charlie 79er, and stepped back. That was it. That was all she did. Danny watched her from across the gravel lot, trying to understand what he was looking at. Iris was already in the ambulance when Graves arrived. He stood with his hands at his sides and looked at Mara the way a man looks at something that has quietly made his afternoon very complicated. He thanked her. He used the word appropriately. He said they'd debrief in the morning. She nodded, picked up her legal pad from the hood of an MP vehicle where she'd set it, and walked to the parking lot. Danny almost let her go. He didn't know why he followed, only that he had been standing against the back wall of that room all day holding maps nobody wanted, and something about watching her walk away felt like letting go of the one thing he'd actually seen clearly. Sergeant Delwyn. He jogged 2 steps to catch up. I was in the room this morning. I just wanted to say. You're Odom, she said. Not unkindly. Yes, Sergeant. You had the grid printouts. She glanced at him sideways. Good situational awareness on the creek overhang, by the way. Those printouts showed the drainage elevation. I used them. He blinked. He hadn't known she'd looked at them. He hadn't known they mattered. She kept walking, and he fell back, and that was the end of it. Or it would have been. The next morning, Iris was rested enough to talk. She'd been with the family liaison officer since 7 a.m., coloring on a piece of paper and answering easy questions about the hours she'd been alone. The liaison officer was patient, a sergeant named Were who was good with children, and the question she asked was simple: do you remember the person who found you? Iris set down her crayon. Copperline, she said. Sergeant Were wrote it down. She thought it was a nickname, something a friendly NCO had given herself to make a scared child feel easier about the dark. She filed it in her notes and passed the notes to the task force room. Danny Odom was the one who saw it. He was back on the wall, his wall, apparently, the back wall of the Fort Caldwin task force suite, holding a second round of printouts nobody had asked for, when Graves read the liaison report aloud. The child reported her rescuer's name as, he paused, a small pause, a fraction of a second, Copperline. The room was quiet. One of the investigators, a CID warrant officer named Tull, looked up from his folder. That's a call sign, he said. The silence changed quality. It had been the ordinary quiet of a morning briefing. Now it was a different kind. Graves looked at Tull. I'm aware. That's a registered JSOC call sign designator, Tull said. He wasn't arguing. He was thinking out loud, which is sometimes the same thing. That prefix doesn't get issued to admin personnel. Graves set the report on the table. Tull had already pulled his laptop. He typed something, read something, typed something else. His posture changed in the middle of it, the way a man's posture changes when a weight lands on him unexpectedly, not collapsing, just settling into something heavier than it was before. Sir, Tull said. You need to see this. Danny couldn't see the screen. He was on the back wall. He would piece together later, from Tull and from Weir and from the warrant officer who finally told him the whole thing over bad coffee in the motorpool break room, what was on that screen. Her name. Her record. 6 classified child recovery operations across 3 overseas deployments, not search operations, not administrative recoveries, joint counterterrorism operations in which missing or seized children were extracted from active threat environments. 3 of them from structures under fire. 2 of them from locations where the official assessment had been that recovery was not viable. She held the Army's Joint Counterterrorism Investigator Badge, the youngest woman ever to earn it, and she had been awarded the Army Commendation Medal with Valor for an action at a forward compound in a country whose name was still restricted in the file. The citation said she had located and extracted a missing coalition child from a collapsed compound while the structure was under direct fire, administered emergency first aid in the open under contact, and carried the child 300 meters to the evacuation point with a separated shoulder she had not reported until after the child was loaded on the aircraft. Her call sign was Copperline. She had been reassigned to administrative duties at Fort Caldwin 14 months ago following the closure of the classified program she'd served. The reassignment had been framed as a professional transition. It was, in fact, the kind of sideways filing that happens to operators when programs close and the institution doesn't quite know what to do with the people who made them work. That was what Tull had on his screen when the door opened. Brigadier General Patricia Ashmore came in the way generals come into rooms, not loudly, not with announcement, simply with the certainty that the room would reorganize around her, which it did. She was the installation's senior investigative commander, and someone had called her though Danny never learned who. She crossed to Tull's laptop. She read for 30 seconds. "Where is Sergeant Delwyn?" she said. "Personnel building, ma'am," Graves said. His voice had changed. Not broken. Graves was not the kind of man who broke, but reduced, the way a room gets quieter when a window opens and the outside comes in. She was on shift at 0800. The general picked up the room's desk phone, dialed 4 digits, and said 2 words, "Send her." They waited 7 minutes. Mara Delwyn came through the door in her duty uniform, name tape straight, beret squared, the same legal pad she'd carried the day before tucked under her left arm. She looked at the room, the general, Graves, Tull, the investigators, Danny on his wall, and she did not look surprised. She looked the way people look when something they've known was coming has finally arrived, not relief exactly, more like the quiet that follows a long-held breath. "Sergeant Delwyn," the general said. She did not reach for the laptop. She reached for the printed citation that Tull had placed on the table. She read it aloud, the whole thing, including the compound, including the shoulder, including the 300 meters, including the child's name, which was different from Iris but the same in the ways that mattered. She read the call sign last. "Copperline," the general said. The word settled into the room the way a stone settles into still water. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Tull stood. Not at attention, not in any parade ground way, just stood, a man getting to his feet because sitting felt wrong. The investigator to his left stood. The sergeant at the board stood. Danny Odom found himself standing before he knew he'd made the decision. Graves was the last. He stood without looking at her, his eyes somewhere on the middle distance, his hands still and correct at his sides, and Danny could not tell you what was moving through the man's thoughts in that moment. Regret, maybe. The specific weight of having been wrong about something important in front of people who would remember it. He stood, and he stayed standing, which was the right thing, and the only thing left to do. The general crossed the room. She shook Mara's hand, a soldier's grip, direct, 2 pumps. "Iris asked for you this morning," the general said, quiet enough that it was almost only for her. "Before the liaison could explain who you were. She just said the name." Mara nodded once. She didn't smile, didn't stand straighter, didn't take anything from the air in the room for herself. She simply said, "How is she?" "Doing well," the general said. "Wants to show you something she drew." "I'd like that," Mara said. She turned, walked to the door, and was gone. The room stayed standing for a moment after she left, the way rooms do when the center of them has walked out and nobody quite knows when to sit back down. Danny Odom stood on his wall and looked at the door and understood, in the slow way that true things arrive, what he had been in the presence of all day yesterday. A woman who had done that, all of that, the compound and the fire and the shoulder and the 300 meters, and had then spent 14 months filing administrative forms in a personnel building, and had then walked into a wood line alone, off the clock, in muddy boots, and found the child, and handed her to the medics, and given the 2-sentence handoff, and walked to the parking lot. No argument. No announcement. No asking to be seen. Just the child, safe, and one name quietly left behind in the dark, small enough for a 7-year-old to carry out of the trees. Danny was still thinking about it when he finally set the grid printouts on the table, hours later, after the room had emptied. He set them down carefully, as though they were something other than paper. He supposed that was because, once, they had been.